everybody's very welcome to this evening's webinar, which is focusing on pesticide use and water quality. So I suppose before we go any further, I just want to clarify that we're more or less focusing more so on the safe use of pesticides and health and safety issues around pesticide use, rather than we say specific sprays for specific weeds and that side of it. So more so on the health and safety and water quality issues around pesticide use. So this evening we have two speakers lined up. So Francis Bligh is a health and safety specialist with Teagasc, based in the Roscommon office, and many of you here will know Francis because he has previously worked as an advisor in the Longford office before taking up his role as a specialist. And Kieran Kenny is our local ASSAP advisor, who's based in the Castlerea office here, and has previously worked for many years as an advisor in the local office here. We're also joined by Penny Gavin, who's a Walsh Scholar based in the Roscommon office, and Penny will be dealing with give us a handout with the questions later on. So before we go any further, there's just a couple of important dates maybe that I might bring to your attention while people are still joining. So the first thing is, and the most important date of the year, is the 17th of May this year, which is the closing date for BPS application. So many of you may have yours submitted at this stage, or if not, your advisor may have been in contact with you. Most of those are being completed over the phone via phone consultation due to the COVID restrictions. And of course, the 17th of May is also the deadline for transfer of entitlement applications as well. So that's probably the most important date of the calendar year in relation to farming in terms of the check in the post. So don't forget that one. One that's coming as quicker is probably the 26th of April, which is the closing date for BPS application. So that's the suckler cow scheme, or weighing the calves. And it's also the closing date for the dairy beef calf program for weighing dairy beef calves. So that's the 26th of April. And all those applications are obviously online. And then coming back to this Friday is the closing date for this tranche of the TAM scheme. So if you need to make an application under that, you'd be advisable to contact your advisor fairly soon. But don't worry, if you don't meet that tranche, the next tranche is open the next day on the 17th of April, and that one will close in July. I think the date is for that. So don't worry if you don't meet the deadline for this one this Friday. There's another one coming up straight after that. So look, there's 50 people or so on the webinar now. We'll make a start. So our first Francis is going to speak first. So Francis is going to basically deal with the health and safety aspects of handling chemicals and maybe the working around the machinery associated with that. So Francis, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and maybe share your screen, please.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Séamus.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Perfect. Thanks very much, Séamus. Yes, so as Séamus says, I suppose between myself and Kieran, we're just going to kind of cover, in my situation, I'm going to cover the safe use of chemicals on farms. So chemicals, by their nature, we need to treat them, I suppose, as something that is dangerous inherently and can harm us. So with that in the back of our minds, we need to kind of take precautions to make sure that we're safe ourselves and we protect the people around us, and also we protect the environment. So Kieran will be covering the environment side of it. I'm just going to try and cover a little bit on the farmer side of the chemical use. So one of the most important documents that I just draw your attention to first is the Farm Safety Code of Practice document. And most, if not all of you, should have this document at home. Every farmer is legally required to have it and have it filled once you have less than 3 employees yourself. So the majority of farmers fall into that category. Once you go over 3 employees, you're supposed to have a full safety statement. So this document covers everything from machinery right through to chemicals, so the chemical aspects of it are important. So I'll just cover them at the end of it. I'll refer to the page in this document that's associated with chemicals. So the first thing I'd say is that knowledge is power. So to know how to do what you're doing and know the implications of not doing it correctly, you need training for it. So only professional users can apply products, chemical products on farms, such as sprays. So that's since the 26th of November 2015. Now, Kieran is going to cover this in more detail. I won't labor on it, but really my point here is that, to know how to do it correctly is the most important piece of information you'll have. And once you have that, you won't go too far wrong. What are the main things you learn in the training? And those of you that have done this training will remember, the importance of reading the label. So Kieran will go through aspects of, the importance of knowing the right concentrations to use, and not to use too much concentration or too high a concentration. What I'm looking at here is just from your own perspective, read the safety information, so that if something goes wrong, if you get a splash or if you get it in your eyes, or God forbid someone might consume it, if a child or someone like that got in contact with it, what do you do? You won't have time really to read it if something like this happens. The time to read it is when you get the product first. So make sure you read the labels and know what to do in those situations. And what they would always say is that if something like that happened and you were going to the doctor, bring the label of the product with you, so that they know there is a number that the doctors have that they can ring once they know the chemical that's in question. And there are antidotes for many of them. So do's and don'ts when using chemicals, there's a lot of, I suppose, branding on the chemicals, and it's all for our safety. So you can see at the top right-hand corner there, the cork on it is designed so it's tamper-proof, so that you need to know how to take it off. You need to be an adult to be able to work out how to do it. And right down through the label, you'll see all the various warnings and the warning messages and the warning signs, to make sure that you're very aware that it is a product that has a danger attached to it. What are the do's? I suppose study the label, as I've said. Read and follow the instructions before you use it. Don't use use protective clothing as recommended, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Keep chemicals locked away and out of reach of children, and dispose of empty containers safely. What's the don'ts do? So don't transfer chemicals into unmarked containers. So as I said there, where people might consume it, it largely happens when it's in a container it's not supposed to be in. So it's something that you should never do. Don't use flammable chemicals near sources of ignition, and don't mix chemicals unless you're assured they don't react. So the personal protective equipment, it's very, very important that if you're going to buy chemicals and you're going into your store and you don't have PPE, that you get that PPE and you get the appropriate PPE. So that you have the disposable rubber gloves, the nitrile gloves that the chemical can't penetrate through. And not just have them on your hands, they need to go up your arms as well, so that all your skin is being covered. The disposable chemical suit and overalls, that they're CE marked, they're for what the purpose of what you're trying to do with them. So it's a grade 4 generally that people use, that they're spray proof, and that's what you need to have, and you need to have the hood on them as well. You can see there eye protection, so having a cover mask over your face to stop say splashes, or prevent splashes if they were to occur, getting in contact with your skin. Your face mask and your shield, have that in place, and making sure that you have the respirator or face mask, or to make sure that you have the appropriate respirator for the type of chemical that you're using. So usually it's an FFP2 or 3. So that's the full face mask, or P2 or P3. So that's really what I'm talking about there, personal protective equipment. Make sure you have it, not just by the chemical. Make sure you're covering yourself as well when you're going at this task. Where do the accidents occur? So largely, the amount of poisonings due to chemicals are low, or are hard to find in relation to how they're reported. Accidents with tractors and farm vehicles are reported in relation to fatal farm accidents. So how are they occurring? With crush injuries. So something as simple as attaching that sprayer onto the tractor can have fatal consequences if it's not done correctly. And if the sprayer isn't on, a level, secure base, and can be attached to the tractor correctly. Something as simple as not putting on the handbrake correctly can mean the tractor can move backwards and an individual can get crushed. So you need to keep that in the back of your mind. Take the time to make sure you're doing everything the way it should be done. being struck by a part of maybe the boom or some aspects of the sprayer. An impact, you can get trapped. Fall from height. Sometimes on some of the larger sprayers, you may have to go up on top of them for various reasons. Making sure you have that the appropriate ladders are in place and that they're secure and that you're not going to slip off it. Getting pinched or pierced can happen also. So, there's a lot of those kind of stats there that are telling us where people are getting killed with farm vehicles. We don't know the numbers of them specifically on sprayers in the last, I don't have that data in the last 10 years, but you can see that it can happen. So it's something that we need to protect ourselves with. Correct storage. So storage is very important. So when you get that chemical and you bring it home, making sure it's in the right container, making sure that you're carrying it safely from the store that you're purchasing it right through to the storage that you're putting it in the yard. So it needs to be a lockable store. A chest freezer or a metal cabinet container are appropriate. Warning sign at the entrance. So that's very important that that there's something present there that will tell you what is in that store and that it's dangerous. Well ventilated with a concrete floor, so that spills can be well ventilated to remove any vapors, and a concrete floor that spills if occur, they can be cleaned up. A bucket of sand also, absorbency there, so that any spills that occur, that it can be cleaned up. Powders above liquid, so keep that in the back of your mind. If you're buying powders, they need to be above liquids. Original containers and labels. A good stock control. So, when things come in, how long their, shelf life is, and when they go out and when they're disposed. And other products allowed in the store. Do you know what I mean? What other stores? So you need to have separate compartments for various products. Storage options. Poor storage, I suppose, is just a picture there that would show that from a bonding perspective, if any of those containers leaked, where is it going to go? It's going to go out on the floor. You can see all sorts of different products in different places there, animal products as well. So that isn't something that would stand up in relation to proper storage of chemicals or safe storage of chemicals. And there's no evidence of a lock on it either. In this situation here, lots of different bits and pieces, and very untidy, and having the lawnmower in there as well amongst all those chemicals isn't what you would be recommending. Proper storage is what we're looking at here. The chest drawer, it is bunded. You can see the bunds in the bottom of those metal cabinets as well. So it's something that you need to think about if you are purchasing, that you have these, they have the appropriate storage in place for them. And another just picture there of appropriate storage. So you could just look at this picture here, and I know it's one of those, it's a very sophisticated looking sprayer, but you could talk about it from the perspective of what's very good in relation to the sprayer. It's new, the surface that the farmer is working on, but from the perspective of what's not very good. You can see there the container he's using, it is labeled, but it's not perfectly labeled in relation to the right label that's on the container. You can see the gloves that he's using there. They're short gloves. There is skin that's been, I suppose, isn't protected. You can see there in the center, it's not being protected. The type of boots he has on, clothes he has on, and he's kind of rubbing his face here as well. So it is something you need to think about when you are, I suppose, interacting with your sprayer. Once you start opening those compartments, it's very important that you have the right PPE and you're wearing the right PPE before you start into that job. Again, transportation of the chemicals. You don't want to be transporting chemicals in the tractor. So you can see here in this particular picture, he's bringing out his little can of chemical with him in the tractor. They can be, if that got punctured, or if it had been opened, there could be vapors inside in the tractor, and it can be very, very dangerous. The tractor itself, from a good, I suppose, if you're looking at it from a positive perspective, there is a capacity to close in the windows and make sure that the spray isn't contaminating the farmer inside. But there are negatives as well in relation to carrying that chemical. So having a compartment on the sprayer is what you'd be recommending. Now, Kieran might talk about this as well, and making sure that that the spray is outside the tractor when you're using it. On the newer sprayers, there is compartments on the sprayers to if you are carrying chemicals. You also need to think about, I suppose, when you're going out with your sprayer, you have I suppose you are responsible for that volume of material you have in the back of that, in that you could have 1,000 liters or whatever, 500 liters in that sprayer. And if that got punctured, if you had a car accident, if you pulled it too close to a wall and you cut the side out of it, all that chemical is going to be released into the environment, or potentially people might get in contact with it. So you need to be very, very careful when you're moving between to a farm from the farmyards, that you kind of keep in the back of your head that you are a person moving very dangerous, hazardous chemicals, and you need to be taking action associated with that. So back to the Farm Safety Code of Practice. So like in this particular document, when you have it on your farm, I'd like you to go to the page that's associated with chemicals and try and answer those questions, from a safety perspective. This the areas would say, if you take the sprayer here and spray and chemicals that are used in the farm, all chemicals are kept in locked stores. Can you answer yes or no to that? All chemical containers are correctly labeled. Can you answer yes or no to that? Chemicals are handled and used by a competent person. Are you able to answer yes or no to that? Approved training as a professional user in pesticide application is undertaken. Can you answer yes or no to that? And work your way all the way down through the questions. So if you go, it's the second or third last section in that green book. As I said, every farmer should have that green book filled. The second or third last section is chemical safety, and you're supposed to have that filled. And it's important to ask yourself those questions. All PPE is cleaned and stored after use. Protective clothing equipment is recommended by the manufacturer's use. So really, I won't say any more. All the questions are there, and they are things that you need to think about and try and answer correctly. Try and answer from your own perspective for the safety of yourself and your family and people that are in your neighbourhood, that you're able to, and working with you, that you're able to answer yes to these things. So I'll finish at that, Séamus. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. If you want to stop sharing your screen there.
Okay.
Just to remind people, I suppose, that for those who want to ask a question, that the Q&A box is down at the bottom there, and we'll deal with all the questions at the end. I suppose just while Kieran is setting up there, Francis, just maybe, I suppose as a nation, we're probably poor enough in our use of PPE. Like, generally the person you see who's tugged out head to toe in PPE is the person who's maybe working for the council or is required to wear it for the work. But generally on farms and that, we're probably poor enough in that regard, I'd say.
Yeah, like I suppose it's not until an issue occurs, or it's not until you have a near miss, I suppose, in relation to these things, that sometimes people's minds start to be, if for a person that's using these sprays a lot, and they might start getting kind of irritants, their skin might be reacting to it a little bit, or the eyes might be reacting to it a little bit. They start to figure out that these chemicals are having an effect on themselves. So some farmers that are using chemicals a lot would tell you that they can't use certain chemicals because they feel that they're having an effect on them. And that means that's known to them. But for what we don't realize is that chemicals are having an effect on us, even though we don't realize it. And they are used. They're used, I suppose, for certain purposes, like for the control of rushes. So they kill rushes. So once they get into your system, they can have an impact on you at certain concentrations. So that's why all the PPE is there to protect you, to put a barrier between you, your skin, your lungs, and the chemical. So if you are a farmer and you're doing this for yourself, then you're only affecting yourself. In a county council situation or others that are using these PPE, these types of chemicals, they're employees that are working for them. So there is a duty of care. So farmers need to see it as a duty of care to themselves and maybe their family members, that they spend the extra time and the extra few pounds in actually buying that PPE and making sure that barrier is there to separate themselves from the chemical and not having themselves get in any ways kind of contaminated by it, or to absorb it in any way. So absorbing it into your skin or into your eyes or into your, not wearing the correct masks and breathing it in. You don't want that to happen.
Yeah. So, and you made an important point there in relation to, I suppose, the number of deaths from pesticide poison is extremely low, but we don't know the long-term effects. There's no figures on, I suppose, the long-term effects of constantly being exposed to such chemicals, like in relation to your skin or your eyes or whatever, like, you know.
Yeah.
So that's an important point. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Francis. So as I said already, the Q&A is there for people who want to ask the questions, and Penny will deal with those later on. So Kieran, Francis, you can mute yourself now, and I'll ask Kieran Kenny to present his presentation.
Thanks, Séamus. And thanks, Francis, for starting the presentation. So just to give you a background, I'm working as a water quality advisor in the ASSAP program, as Séamus has said. My role in that program is engaging with farmers in specific catchments in Longford and Roscommon, and giving advice and support on water quality issues, which would include, on occasions, dealing with pesticides. There's a number of catchments that I'm involved with. There's two in Longford, including the Loch Forbes catchment, which is significant for pesticides, as we'll discuss later. And also in Roscommon, I presently dealing with 4 different catchments, but I have a few more to do by the end of the program and the end of next year. So the focus of my talk today, I want to concentrate on the safe use of grassland herbicides to try and minimize their impact on water quality, and in particular drinking water. So the areas that I'm going to deal with in detail, firstly, we'll look at the limits or the standards that the EU have set, or the acceptable standards are set in terms of the level of pesticide that can be present in drinking water. And as you'll see, that is a very minute quantity. We'll then look at the actual pesticides themselves that are causing concern, and you'll see that most of those are actually grassland herbicides. We'll then look at the sources of pesticide contamination. So how do they actually get into the water? Where are they coming from? The important area then I want to obviously concentrate on and deal in some detail is how can we reduce the losses to water? So we're talking about focusing on best practice at the risky stages of spraying. This is the key area. We'll then briefly look at the different monitoring that's carried out to detect exceedances, both in drinking water and raw water, and also the importance of raising awareness with all users of pesticides, be they farmers, amenity users, or even amateur users. And then we'll have a questions and comments section at the end. So first of all, the limits for pesticides. Back in 1980, I think the EU brought in legislation in terms of coming up with a standard or a limit in terms of what was acceptable for pesticide, the level of pesticides that could be present in drinking water. There wasn't much science to this. They decided to go with the easy option of trying to give a level that is as close as possible to 0. So the closest figure they could come up with was 0.1 microgram per liter, which is 1 part in 10 billion. Now, if you're like myself and you struggle to kind of work out what 1 part in 10 billion is, that's equivalent to one drop of chemical in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or indeed 1 second in 317 years. So it's a very insignificant level, and as I said, it's almost 0. Because it's such a small level, it's very easy to breach the limit with both through careless use and handling. And for example, if one was to inappropriately discard the foil seal on the lid of the container, of an empty container, by throwing that into a small watercourse 1 meter wide by 0.3 of a meter deep, could actually cause a breach in that watercourse for up to 30 kilometers. So that's what you're dealing with because of the levels of the limits are standard. The actual pesticides then that are causing the concern, on an annual basis, the EPA document this information, and it is useful information. Now you don't obviously have to focus on all the details here, but the top table summarizes the exceedances in pesticides over the period 2016 up to 2020. Now you can see that the number of exceedances in the first column, in general, it has been reducing. So in 2017 there was a maximum figure of 150 exceedances in 49 different drinking water supplies around the country. So for 2 years that figure has come down considerably. Now, unfortunately, in 2020 it crept up a little bit. It went from 82 up to 91, which is some concern. But the suspicion is there that with COVID and with the lockdown, there was maybe an increased use of pesticides around dwelling houses by amateur use, and particularly the use of glyphosate, which you can see in the bottom left-hand table. Traditionally, it was only 1 or 2 exceedances of glyphosate each year, but in 2020, that figure went up to 10. So they suspect that there was increased use by amateurs around houses trying to control weeds and etc. And that may have contributed to the increase. That would be good, obviously, if that is the case. I suppose next year will prove the figures again when we get another year's data. The other important message is the list of chemicals that are causing the issues. You can see yourselves, and this is well known. Mcpa is the biggest culprit. So it accounts for just over 50% of the exceedances in 2020, 46 out of 91. Now, traditionally, that figure used to be higher. It used to be up to 85% of exceedances. So it has reduced considerably, and that reduction is probably down to, number one, the raising of awareness in terms of the seriousness of using MCPA, and it's probably got so much negative press as well that people are afraid to use it. And that has been proved in the last 2 years. There has been a considerable reduction of about 50% in the volume of MCPA that has been sprayed. Now, other chemicals have increased, including 2,4-D, which is a close relative of MCPA. So 2,4-D and glyphosate account for 10 each. Total pesticides, that's where you have small traces of a number of individual pesticides. That's also significant. The other two that I'll point out, or the three maybe that are fairly significant from a grassland herbicide point of view, is triclopyr is common enough chemical found in herbicides, and there's 5 exceedances related to that. And the other two are fluroxyphor and chlorpyrrolide. Now, to give you an indication, I know what these are, but most farmers wouldn't associate the chemical with the product. So the product names for some of these chemicals, firstly, MCPA, some of the product names that you'd be familiar with would be Agritox, Agroxon 50, M50, Martone, and NU46. So that would be MCPA. In terms of glyphosate, common examples of that would be Roundup, Roundup Flex, Gallop, and Kyleo. There would be typical examples. 2,4-D, again, would be D50, Martox 50, Trust, and Lupo. There would be fairly popular herbicides. Triclopyr, then there's four products that are very widely used on farms, grassland farms. Docstar Pro is one, 4-Fronti is another, Thistlex, and the last one is Grazon Pro. Now, Docstar Pro also, as well as having triclopyr, also has fluroxyphor in its component, and Grazon Pro has chlorpyrrolide. So that gives you an indication of some of the common trade names that are associated with these chemicals. So how do pesticides get into water? It's important, obviously, that we try and be aware of where the risks are. There's 2 main sources where pesticides can contaminate both surface or groundwater, And the two sources are diffuse sources coming from the field or point sources from the farmyard. So firstly, the diffuse sources. Diffuse losses in the field would include spray drift, which obviously, as it says, it's where you get drift in the spray. When you spray, if there's any kind of wind, there is a risk that you could get spray in towards the field boundary and possibly into an adjoining water body. So it's away from the intended field or crop that you're trying to spray, and it unfortunately some of it might get into the water body. In terms of surface runoff, there is a danger or a risk if you get rainfall following spraying, that some of the chemical can be lost, particularly if you get heavy rainfall on poorly draining soils. There is a risk there of surface runoff, and that will bring some of the chemical with it to the nearest water body. Soil erosion is probably more of an issue on tillage farms where you have ploughing and tram lines, etc., or where soil can actually can run with rainfall and bring some of the chemical with it. Drainage can be significant, and I'll show you a slide later on to indicate that. But there are times when chemical can leach down through the soil and into a drainage channel which connects with a nearby water body. The point sources then from the farmyard. These obviously would include leaks during storage, which Francis mentioned, and also then spills during handling operations, which are high-risk operations. Important message. One of the important messages I want to inform you tonight is it's relatively easy to try and control the point sources, and these can be largely be avoided through good practice and best practice management. It's much more difficult to minimize or reduce the diffuse sources. You certainly won't eliminate them, you might reduce them. And the reason it's difficult to eliminate them or reduce them is because the operator isn't the only factor here in relation to the quantity of diffuse losses you get. There are other factors such as soil conditions and weather conditions, etc. Whereas the operator is the main factor in terms of point source losses in the farmyard. The awareness of key risks. Well, the important point here, I suppose, is the risk of losses are higher at certain stages of the spraying operation. So the most dangerous stages are the ones towards the top here, the ones in red, and the risk reduces as you go down the triangle. So the riskiest operations would be cleaning the sprayer and obviously loading and mixing the concentrate into the sprayer as well. They will be the two high risk areas. The least risky stages then would be transporting the chemical or the sprayer to the field, storing the pesticide, and the least risk of all would be transporting the chemical from the retailer to the farm. Now, accidents can happen at those stages, but it is very unusual. So in dealing with the issue of trying to minimize losses to watercourses, I suppose implementing best management practices is the best advice I can give. So this includes practices during storage, preparation for spraying, handling, and of course, actual spraying in the field. So we'll go through the main points and the best practices that relate to each. Francis did mention registration. This is very important and significant, and it's relevant regardless of whether the actual farmer is going to carry out the spraying himself or whether he's going to get a contractor in or a neighbour to do the spraying. It's very important that he is sure that the operator is registered, because you will have to get the registration number or the PU number for the sprayer when it comes to filling your record sheets. So the farmer is obliged to check that regardless of who's doing the spraying. The other point, I suppose, this registration is in place since 2015. So you had to do a training course and you had to subsequently register them with the department. to attain that PU number. The sprayer should be well maintained, calibrated and tested. Well maintained obviously means that the nozzles, the lines, or the pipes and the lines in the sprayer, and obviously the pump and other components need to be in good working condition. On an annual basis, they probably should be calibrated to ensure that the same volume of spray is coming out of each nozzle. And then the requirements from a Sustainable Use Directive is that the machine has to be tested every 3 years. Now, to date, that involves just boom sprayers, but there is talks that that by the end of 2021, both weed lickers and weed wipers will also have to be tested. A very important point, and I suppose it's something that happened in the past, and maybe unfortunately it's seldom it happens anymore. You should never fill a sprayer directly from a watercourse. The danger here is that the input pipe from the sprayer, if it's dropped into a water body, there is a high risk that there will be some chemical contaminating the watercourse. And you can see, as I discussed earlier, what 1 or 2 drops from the lid of a container can cause. In this case, there would be obviously a high risk of an exceedance in the watercourse. As Francis said, it's very important that the label is always read and follow the guidelines on it. Even if you've used a chemical in the past, don't think that you're familiar with all the detail. It should be checked every time you take out a herbicide to use it. So the important information would include information on the rate of application, the concentrate per hectare, and also the water volume per hectare. And other details would include the approved application method that you can use. So for an example of that might be a chemical like Grassland Pro can only be used with a knapsack sprayer. And no other application method can be used with Grassland Pro. So that kind of information is useful, and that will be on the label. The correct time is also important. So be sure to apply the spray on a young, healthy crop of weeds. And as Francis pointed out, there's critical information there, safety data as well on the label. You should always avoid spills during mixing and filling. I've highlighted this in red because it's obviously one of the high risk areas. So particularly when you're handling the concentrated product, it's very important that you concentrate on what you're doing. And it's worth maybe having a containment system in place, such as a drip tray, just in case that there is some spillage. So that could be some temporary structure that you put under the sprayer in the event that there's a spillage. Note the location of nearby water bodies and field drains. So you should always check, the farmer should always be aware of the water bodies that's present in the field and take obviously precautions when it comes to buffer zones then, which we'll talk about. The field drains on the photo on the right hand side here, you can see an example of a field drain. So a field drain is a drainage channel in a field, maybe with a pipe and stone. And sometimes it's a poor practice, but some farmers are now putting stone right up to the surface. And in a situation like that, what you're doing there is you're creating a pathway directly out to a water body for pesticides. So under no circumstances should you be spraying close to that within a few meters of a field drain like that. In a situation like that, you're probably limited to maybe spot spraying weeds close by. Comply with the buffer zones and safeguard zones. So I'll talk in a minute or so about buffer zones, but the safeguard zones relate to an abstraction point for drinking water, where the abstraction point is taking water from groundwater. So in that situation, depending on the volume of water and the number of people it's supplying, you could be looking at a 200-meter safeguard zone. So this the next list of management practices then, firstly, and most of this is common sense, this is all sort of good practice in the field. No spraying should be carried out if heavy rain is forecasted within 48 hours. Well, the significance of that obviously again, depending on, particularly if it's a poorly draining soil you're dealing with, if you get heavy rain within 48 hours, there's a high risk that some of the chemical will be mobile and will travel with the rainwater and leave the field due to surface runoff. And where will it go? It'll go to the lowest point, which is generally a drain or a watercourse. No spraying in windy conditions. So ideally, you pick a calm day, and certainly not a day with any more than a light breeze. That's important. Otherwise, you're going to have a high risk of spray drift. No spraying on wet grass or saturated soils. Again, this is important, both from a financial reason and environmental reason. But environmentally, you are increasing the risk of runoff or losses if you're applying on a saturated soils, because if the soil is already close to saturation and you get rainfall afterwards, then the mobility is going to be greater. The red light here in terms of when you shouldn't go into the field is if you're going to leave tire marks with the tractor, then that's an indication you shouldn't be spraying. Keep the boom height as low as possible. So this is one way of controlling the spray drift. So ideally, the maximum height of the boom above the crop should be a maximum of 50 centimeters. So keep it as low as possible. And also to reduce spray drift, it's certainly worth considering replacing your nozzles with drift or low reducing nozzles. What that does is it increases the droplet size, and that will cut down on spray drift. Two other critical areas is washing down the sprayer and spraying out the washings in the field. So that is very important. We'll deal with that in a minute. And lastly, triple rinsing and recycling empties. Again, we'll focus on that. So the buffer zones that I had briefly mentioned, the definition of a buffer zone, it's an unsprayed strip between the edge of a water body and the edge of the treated area. It applies to all types of surface water bodies. So we're including ditches, channels that convey water at any time during the year, and obviously streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes. So they are all surface water bodies that you need to protect with a buffer zone. There's a legal requirement to comply with the buffer zone on the product label. So the buffer zone for the product, the chemical that you're using, will be specified on the label. Now, sometimes it's difficult to find it, but it will be on it. Generally, in 99% of cases with grassland herbicides, it's 5 meters is the buffer zone. Now, the one exception that I'm aware of is glyphosate. In that case, it's 1 meter. Okay. In relation to cleaning the sprayer and best practice, we're talking about cleaning the inside of the sprayer and cleaning the outside. So cleaning the inside, do it as soon as possible after spraying. And what you do is you have to rinse it out 3 times. Now, ideally, on the newest sprayers, you will have a wash tank or a clean tank with water attached to the sprayer. So you'll take water out of that, put it into the sprayer tank, and obviously you jet the tank to rinse it, and then continue that or do that process 3 times, and you spray out the diluted solution in the field. So that's the important thing. And after doing that 3 times, the water then should be largely clean. If you don't have a water tank on the sprayer, then you will have to come back to where you fill the sprayer. So that could be coming back to the farmyard and adding water to the sprayer and go back and spraying it out in the field that you sprayed. So that there is a nuisance factor attached to that, but that must be done. Cleaning the outside, then again, this is important, and the earlier this is, or the sooner this is done after spraying, the better, because there will be residues on the outside of the sprayer, and if they dry off, then it will be more difficult to wash them off, and you'll have to use more water. So wash them down in the field. Empty container management, triple rinsing, which you're familiar with. So when you're finished, when a container is emptied, what's involved is a 3-step process. You fill the container to 1/3 with water. You close the lid of the container and shake the drum. then you fill washings back into the spray and spray it out in the field. So you repeat that procedure then 3 times. Obviously, you're going to be cleaning the cap with the container and you're shaking it, so that will clean the cap. To deal with the seal, you probably should put the seal into the container when you're doing this. So that then will leave it safe to be recycled with the IFP recycling scheme.
Kieran, just 3 or 4 minutes there now.
Right, briefly then. Additional measures for MCPA. MCPA is considered high risk, like 2,4-D. The reasons they're high risk is they're highly soluble and more mobile in water than other herbicides. And also they're highly persistent in the environment, and particularly in anaerobic conditions. And I suppose the other factor is they're widely used and they're fairly cheap products, so they are causing problems. The prohibited period for use of MCPA is after the 30th of September up to the 1st of March. So you cannot use it during that period. They're not for use in a weed liquor. Cannot use in a weed liquor. They're not registered for use in a weed liquor. So you can only use them in a sprayer. The alternative option to use an MCPA in a sprayer for controlling rushes, we would suggest maybe consider using glyphosate in a weed liquor or weed wiper. You're using less chemical, and it's probably a safer chemical in a situation where you have problems with pesticides showing up in water bodies. It's not necessary to spray rushes in the case of BPS eligibility. It is sufficient in that case to either top the land or to graze with animals. And there's a new approach with the department have suggested a new strategy for controlling rushes, and it's dependent on the actual farm in question. They're suggesting either to go the containment route or suppression. The containment route is for basically recommended topping, and it's a more sustainable approach for rush control, and it's suited to the extensive farmer that has poor swards, poor soils, poor drainage, high rainfall, and has a risk to water bodies locally. So that might be the situation for a lot of farms in this area. Suppression is the exact opposite. So that would involve using chemical control, where you'd be talking about more intensive and more better farms and better soils, etc. Briefly, with regard to monitoring, there's 2 different monitoring programs going on as such. Irish Water are responsible for monitoring the tap water, and they do that during the spraying season, usually on a monthly basis. So if they come on an exceedance, an investigation file is opened by the EPA. If they find 1 to 3 exceedances during the year, then that supplier, that drinking water supply, will be on the watch list. If there's more than 4 exceedances, it goes on a more serious list, which is called the ACT list. And nationally, there's 6 drinking water supplies on the ACT list, including Lochforbes and Longford. The other monitoring is carried out on the raw water. That's the water in the rivers and streams and lakes before it's actually extracted for drinking water. Of the 6 supplies on the ACT list, there's 5 catchments there that have a raw water sampling program carried out at present by AFA. And one of those obviously is in Lochforbes. There's 18 different locations within the catchment where the sampling is carried out. And just briefly, to give you an indication of the results for 2020, you can see there yourselves, there are quite a number of exceedances found right around the catchment in all different areas. So it's a complex issue. It's a huge problem in this area to try and solve it. The one thing that it has pointed out in recent times, as well as checking or monitoring, taking samples during the spraying season, in the last 2 years, they've sampled during the winter when there's no spraying going on. And they have found no exceedances during that period. So that would suggest that that the exceedances likely relate to recent use, recent applications. Coming to the end, the other important aspect of trying to solve the whole problem of pesticides showing up in water quality is trying to raise awareness, and that's the whole idea of this evening. So there's a number of different ways of doing this nationally and locally. And traditionally, I suppose the sources of information that we've included would involve press articles, radio interviews, use of social media, technical leaflets, and of course, farm events promoting best practice. So all of these are valuable tools trying to solve the problem. And lastly, Séamus, you'll be glad to know, just to finish on a positive note, I did a survey there a number of years back with 187 farmers in North Roscommon. And one of the key messages that came out of the survey was that farmers are very concerned about drinking water quality. 95% of the survey population declared that they would be very concerned or extremely concerned if pesticides were present in their drinking water. So that acknowledges the concern that farmers have in relation to the use of pesticides. Nobody wants to have this issue in their drinking water. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. Very comprehensive presentation there. If you want to stop sharing your screen, and we'll get everybody back. Okay, so just while the rest of them are unmuting themselves there, Kieran, I suppose it has been mentioned in the farm to fork strategy that there is a target reduction in pesticide use going forward, isn't that right?
Yes, of this, they mention a figure of 50%, which is fairly optimistic. And how that'll happen is unknown yet, but that's what the policy is going to drive, 50% reduction.
Yeah, okay, right. So Penny, a number of questions in there, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, we have a few here. So the first one I have is for Francis. When are Teagasc running the half-day health and safety courses that are also needed for TAMS?
So Teagasc is continually running them. I know in Roscommon there's one on Thursday morning. So if anyone is interested, you can make contact with your local office. Or if you're not from Roscommon, in Longford also, you can make contact with your local office in Longford. The courses are being ran online. So it's just a matter of having access to a computer, and if you're good with computers and you can use Zoom, you're flying. If you're not, you might need someone to help you to log on. So contact your local office, and they'll be able to talk you through what needs to be done. They're happening online due to COVID.
Brilliant, thanks. And then you were mentioning about having proper PPE. So someone here is asking, where can you get the proper PPE?
So there's a lot of different, I suppose, suppliers of the PPE. A lot of farmers would go to their local co-ops, and to purchase them. But there's a very hardware stores, different stores. There are some specialist stores as well that you can go to that you can get specialist types of PPE.
Brilliant. And then someone else was asking, could you clarify what a professional user is and what certification is required, or how can they get it?
So I suppose Kieran kind of covered that in his presentation there. I might just pass that to you, Kieran, if you want to answer it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're a farmer and you wish to use professional user products, then obviously if you want to spray yourself, be it even using a knapsack sprayer or a boom sprayer or a weed licker or a weed wiper. So they're the three common methods of applying products on herbicides on farms. So if you want to use either of those three, then you do have to be trained for the relevant sprayer type of method of application that you're going to use. Now, if it's only using a knapsack, then the advice would be to do a knapsack training course and to be registered to use knapsack full stop. But if you're going to use a number of them, such as a knapsack and a boom sprayer, or a knapsack and weed licker or weed wiper, then the idea would, in that situation, would be to go on and do the other training course, which is relevant to the boom sprayer. That will include the knapsack. Then will allow you to be eligible to use a knapsack as well. Now there are some farmers obviously that will have no training and are not certified to use professional user products. In that case, they will have to rely on a contractor. And probably the way things are going And because there's so much risk involved in using these products, probably the best advice is that farmers in the future maybe should be reliant on contractors, because contractors are, you would suspect, should be more competent than any farmers, because farmers, grassland farmers, may only be using a sprayer once a year, maybe once every 2 or 3 years. So it's very hard for them to be as competent as a contractor.
Perfect.
I might just come in there, Penny, just in relation to like, you know, a farmer might ask, where do you do the courses, or who does them? So, you know, if farmers want to contact, you know, any of the offices, we give them a kind of a list of the various suppliers. The department have a list as well, but the Teagasc offices can supply them, or maybe contact Kieran, and he might be able to give them kind of an indication of where they can get the course done.
Brilliant. And just staying with you, Francis, someone's asking, if you're getting a contractor to spray weeds, do you need to put anything in the chemical section of your risk assessment document? So
yeah, you should. Obviously, some farmers will buy the chemical and the contractor will use it. In that situation, there's some questions there that are appropriate. Most farms will have some chemicals of some type, whether it's detergents or some kind of, we'll say, different cleaning agents, any kind of chemicals that are on the farm. You know, people need to be kind of conscious of those being present, and that they're using them. So, you know, even down to some of the medicines that they might be using for animals. You know, how are they stored? How are they managed? You know, that section, that risk assessment document will help them through, ask them a few questions that will help them to ensure that they're doing things, you know, the way they should. And as we said earlier, like the safety courses, the half-day safety courses focus on helping farmers to fill that document. So, you know, if there are any questions, obviously ring your local office and your local advisor. But also you could take part in that half-day safety course, and they will kind of show you exactly how to fill those sections in that risk assessment document.
Brilliant. There's another question on how long should you leave land idle before letting stock out after applying a pesticide?
Well, this is certainly one of the examples of where you'll be checking the label. So this is the grazing interval you'll be checking on the label. But certainly it will be probably a week plus that you'll be looking at. But check the label for that.
And Kieran, what would be the #1 problem that you see on farms contributing to water quality issues?
I'm not quite sure. Is this question relating to pesticides or water quality issues in general? But I'll take it as two different questions. So water quality issues in general, the major issues in the Roscommon Longford area would be losses of phosphorus, nutrients, and sometimes nitrogen, but more phosphorus than nitrogen, and then also the losses of sediments getting into water. They're the two big ones.
Okay.
But if it relates to pesticides, problems with pesticides on farms, what we're seeing there, again, probably looking at poor storage, maybe non-compliance with buffer zones. So you might see where farmers have sprayed too close to water bodies, and also lack of training and not registered as professional users. They would be the three big ones.
Brilliant. Can getting lime levels right help in counteracting rushes?
Yeah, I'm glad someone asked this question, because I was conscious that I didn't actually, and it was a very important point to make, and I should have probably made it during the presentation, but chemical control really is the last resort in terms of dealing with the weed problem on a farm. So the first approach is you should firstly talk to your advisor and look at alternative methods. And alternative methods would include obviously lime and improving the soil fertility, as well as improving drainage. There would be and other than that, then you're looking at obviously mechanical control first before you go to chemical control. So top and first. So chemical control should be the last resort.
Brilliant. And there's just one final question now, and you went over this, but you might just want to re-emphasize it. Can I apply Mcpa with a weed liquor to avoid spray drift from boom sprayer?
No, obviously not. So the man that asked this mustn't be listening during the presentation. Absolutely not. You can't use MCPA in a weed liquor. Not for use. You get into bother because when it comes to filling the record sheets, you're supposed to state the method of application that you used. That's one of the important details that you have to add to the records.
That's all the questions we have there now.
Okay, thanks very much, Penny. So there's nothing left for me to say, only to wrap it up. We're just gone over 9 o'clock, so it's perfect timing. So I want to thank Francis and Kieran for 2 very comprehensive presentations, and I hope our audience got some good points out of those. I want to thank Penny for handling the questions so well. And for all that's left for me to say is to thank everybody for joining the webinar and to stay safe. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.